Welcome back, footy fans, to another episode of Donnie's Disposals. I am your host, Coach Donnie Hesser, back with another AFL round review. The grand final has come, it has gone. We have ourselves a premiere. We have a few finals to talk with, a season to review. This is going to be fun because I have a couple of guys that have never been on a podcast together. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Two really awesome co-hosts. First, we start off, we'll jump down to Victoria, Australia, and we have to have the man that is Palmy and Oz. Palmy, it is great to see you, sir.
Hey up, it's good to be back. I've been here a few times, so always a pleasure talking with you, Donny, and good day to all the viewers. I hope everyone's enjoying the off season.
Well, I know Blues Nation always love hearing you talk, Palmy, and I always love having you hop on. It's always great to have an international version of the podcast. I know that I chuckle when I do. I have Mike Kieran, who helps me do the AFLW, who's an Irishman, so it's always funny to do those podcasts. And then joining me from LA, California, feeling a little bit better than he did yesterday when we were originally supposed to prep this podcast, Mr. Rick Shaibani. Rick, great to see you again, sir.
Always a pleasure, Donnie. It's great to be back. I think it's my third appearance on the podcast. So, yeah, always great to talk footy and recap what was a pretty terrific season. Obviously, Brisbane won all the chocolates in the end. So, congrats to them. And also, like you said, appreciate you guys rescheduling for me yesterday. I was a little bit under the weather for a few days here. But, yeah, it's Friday night here in the States, and we are ready to recap the 2024 season.
It has been fantastic. Let's jump right into it. We're going to have to go all the way back to the semifinals because of a few scheduling issues, but that means we have a few more games to talk about. So let's jump right into it. We'll jump down to Palmy here. Your thoughts on all of the games that have happened through the semis, prelims, and finals. Thoughts on the footy that you got to see. Unfortunately, after your beloved Blues went down to the Lions in that elimination final.
Yeah, I mean, the first week of finals was kind of one-sided, wasn't it, in pretty much all the games, bar the Sydney game. They were kind of non-events, but then when the semi-finals came, it really did heat up, didn't it? The old rumor, once you've got a few teams left in eliminations, you get the cream of the crop, and it really was the case. That Brisbane Giants game potentially could be the moniker for the game of the season. Port Adelaide looked done and dusted after their first week of finals, and Ken Hinkley found something, and people were daring to dream. And then the prelims were phenomenal, weren't they? Geelong Brisbane could be one of the greatest games we've seen in the last 20 years. That game was two sides that were playing a grand final. And I went into that game when I watched that and thought, have Brisbane maybe spent their chocolates? We see that quite a lot in the
Mhm.
AFL. A team comes out and has an absolute 12 round dust up heavyweight title fight and gets to the grand final and has no legs because Sydney effectively had a bye, or Sydney mob, like Port were hoping Sydney would win it. But they were phenomenal. It was a phenomenal final series, and
Mhm.
it was funny that we always say there's always that argument in there: back season form and then consistent form. Sydney were the form team throughout the year. If you were going to give the title on credits earned, it was definitely Sydney. If you were going to give the title to someone on back end form, it's definitely Brisbane. Brisbane were
Mhm.
the form team for the last 10 rounds. It made an interesting matchup. It reminded me a little bit of Usyk versus Tyson Fury, two different styles.
Mhm.
You probably didn't give Brisbane a chance throughout 24 rounds. You would have said Brisbane would have lost to Sydney, but both got there, both worthy winners. But that final series was interesting, and we somehow got the two form teams, even though we went a weird way around it.
A little bit odd for sure. Rick, your thoughts on the finals?
Yeah, no, it was absolutely there was some scintillating footy for sure. I mean, you can't ask for much more from two semifinals that are within a goal of each other. Of course, the Lions beat GWS by 5 points. Port Adelaide takes down Hawthorn by 3. I reckon you might be onto something, in terms of like we kind of thought that Brisbane had really spent themselves by clinging on to that win against the Cats in the prelim, but yeah, I think they definitely made a statement in the grand final. And in retrospect, you wonder, of course, if Port had beat Sydney, would it have been a more competitive grand final? Who knows? But I think at the end of the day, it matters how you finish in September. And like we said, Sydney was minor premiers home and away season. They looked fantastic, but then again, there was one or two games every few weeks or so where they would just disappear for a quarter, or they would start slow, or there were just things where they weren't quite in rhythm. And I feel like that was something that really came to bite them. Obviously, we'll get to the grand final in a bit, but yeah, it felt like Brisbane. It's a great story of perseverance, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Chris Fagan waited forever to get a flag. The rare guy who didn't play VFL or AFL himself who's won a flag, so that's kind of nice. And yeah, Brisbane had been the bridesmaid knocking on the door for so long, and they finally broke through. And after a 0-4 start, so yeah, the Lions really hung in there, and they went out with a bang. And the final series in general was pretty terrific. I don't really give it much thought in terms of like how it compares to other years, but boy, we definitely had some instant classics, didn't we?
This was the final series, and honestly, I look at it and I go, it was almost the mirror image of the season. Like you had some absolutely incredible games, some games that they kind of made you scratch your head a little bit, and then some games that absolutely took your breath away, and then some games that absolutely just bored the crap out of you because they were just not competitive. This entire final series was literally littered with the way this season was. It was kind of almost, like I said, it was kind of almost apropos the way the finals went. Is the title game a little bit marred because of the margin? Absolutely. I'm a Swans fan, and I know that was that the performance I was expecting. Absolutely not. I agree with you, Palmy. I went into that grand final a little bit more confident because I thought, did Brisbane spend their petrol tickets the previous two games trying to get there, and would we see the opposite? And just I almost say this was almost a mirror image of 2022, not just because of the result, but you had the best team at the time playing a team that was playing really good footy, but was kind of inconsistent. It was the same thing with the Swans, inconsistent, really good versus a team that was playing its absolute best at the absolute right time. So let's go through it, semifinals, prelim finals, and then we'll review the grand final. I will bury my head in the sand on that one, but whatever. I will be the professional that I am. So let's jump to it. The first of the semifinals sees Adelaide survive the Hawkball Hawks in Port Adelaide by 3, 75-72. And I don't know whether I want to talk about the game or I want to talk about Hinkley deciding to have a crack at Jack Ginnivan, because I'm not sure what got more coverage, the way Port Adelaide won this game or the way Hinkley responded after the game. So, Rick, I'll go to you. Like, this was an incredible game of footy, but for me, it's a little bit marred by what happened after the final siren.
Yeah, like I think I can speak for most of the footy community when I say, a lot of respect for Ken Inkley, but yeah, it's not a good look. You don't want to be carrying on after the game, especially in a really tight game in a really important matchup. But no, I mean, Port, they definitely, like you said earlier, Donnie, they really, hit another level after a really disappointing start to their finals campaign. Obviously, getting blown out by Geelong at home, it really has to sting. So yeah, they really responded well, and we've seen Hawthorn catch teams this year where they were probably counted out and they found a way to win. So holding off a pretty dangerous Hawthorn team, and hey, a Hawthorn team that picked pretty straight too, 11 goals
Mhm.
6. They had some moments for sure, and I reckon Hawthorn will be in good stead going into the off season. But yeah, just a strange ending for a game that probably meant a lot to Port fans, but yeah, just kind of a little too much carry on there.
Tommy, your thoughts?
I might be showing my age. You know what? I enjoyed the build up before. I feel like Australia's started to water down its sportsmen at a rapid rate. Being a Pom, I've seen the worst of Australians in the 90s. Their cricket team, like all of them, bleach tips, arrogance, this superiority complex. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and that's the beautiful thing about Australians. We're good, we're proud, and I love Ginny's pre-game. See you in a couple of weeks to Brody Grundy. I was like, I like that, and and Hinkley firing back. The only issue I had with Hinkley was I think he could have maybe done that in a more mature way, where he could have maybe done that in the press conference. That would have been a
Right.
great
Mhm.
soundbite in the press conference. Him ending his press conference with "Hope Ginny comes next week to support his mate Grundy," like he said pre-game, because I'm assuming that's what he's on about. Like, be a little bit, but
Yeah,
I don't
Cheeky.
mind
Be a
it.
little bit
I,
cheeky about it.
yeah,
definitely.
I didn't mind it. I mean, yeah, Sicily. I had more issues with Sicily and Mitchell at the end of the game. To be honest, I thought Mitchell, a man who I admire greatly, I felt like Mitchell could have handled that a bit better. I think there's
Mhm.
got to be a bit of professional respect between the
Yeah.
coaches, and Mitchell as a player wasn't the friendliest cat, was he? He wasn't.
Mhm.
He wasn't an extra on Yo Gabba Gabba. He played the game a little bit. He played the game a
And
little bit
also,
tough, didn't he?
Yep,
right.
he
And
had some
also
But
wiggle to him.
Sicily, with Sicily as well. Like he's a footballer, but he's a guy who just has to keep his emotions under his control sometimes. And
Hmm.
it was there was a lot of emotion in that game, no question.
Yeah,
and I enjoyed Ginny's reaction when he's getting shouted at by Hinkley. Like, and
mhm.
credit needs to go to
Yeah,
Ginny. He laughed, and that face he pulled was kind of like, "I said what I
yeah.
said. I'm getting it back."
Mhm.
But the
He
game
feeds off
itself,
that energy. Yeah, it's
uh, yeah, and the game itself was
oh,
spectacular,
definitely.
wasn't it? I
Mhm.
mean, Hawthorne will look at this game, and that last 10 minutes, that was all Hawthorne.
Mhm.
And there's the learning for Hawks. They got so close. Credit to Port, because let's be honest, the articles were already written on Friday the 13th. Hinkley needs to
Yep.
go.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that was big man tings, as they say back in the mean streets of London, from Ken Hinkley and his boys. They really did well. But
Yep.
Hawthorne, what a season. Like, to be
Yeah.
fair, I hate the phrase free hit in sport, but that was as close to a free hit. They left that game heads held high, champion team, and a lot to do next year.
And
I'll
we know how young Hawthorne is. They're
mhm.
definitely going to be back in September if the footy bounces their way. You could definitely argue they were ahead of schedule this year,
Mhm.
and yeah, Mitchell's got them playing such an entertaining brand of footy, and Ginnivan and some of the younger guys they have going through there, Dylan Moore, they've really become the future stars of that club, and that's a proud footy club. So it's good to
Mhm.
see Hawthorne up and about again. The rebuild's ahead of schedule. I think Mitchell is I think they're going to aim pretty high next year. Now, are they prelim material? Who knows? But they're a young team. They're going to be returning most of their guys. I think there's definitely a chance the Hawks can keep the good times rolling.
I'm one of those. I went into this final series going, whoever won between the Doggies and the Hawks going into the semifinal, I thought had a huge advantage because they would be coming off a super high of beating the other informed team going into the finals,
Sure.
facing a Port Adelaide team that, I mean, literally, I mean, they were the proverbial step on the rake and get the handle to the face. Like in the first round, they literally kept finding the rake. And I went, this is a scary situation. You've got a very confident, very cocky almost Hawks team coming into your place, and everybody's talking about will your coach be fired if you lose. It was this weird aura about this game. Port Adelaide came out and they went, you know what? We're not going to deal with this crap. I mean, Butters goes out even though he had the rib issue and made a couple of heavy tackles. Port literally they kind of took it personally, and I appreciate the chip on their shoulder. But I also look at it and I go, oh, this Hawks team, I agree with you, Palmy. Like the free hit mantra was used a lot, but really think the Hawks kind of did. They just went out and they just played. They thought if we lose, we lose, we win because they're ahead of schedule. And the scary part is you look at the trade period. I know we're kind of hitting it now. Josh Battle's already been signed. It sounds like Barras is next in. You take an already pretty darn good team that the Hawks had, and you add two really good defenders to it. You're going to move some pieces. This is a Hawks team could be scary good next year. They're ahead of schedule. It's kind of scary, but Port did what they needed to do. I agree with you. I think Hinkley should have been cheeky and should have done it in the press conference, not on the field. I think he went a little overboard. This is just me personally. I think he went a little overboard. I think he went a little too far. So I kind of understand the reaction by Sicily, I kind of understand it. Do I agree with Mitchell's comments? No, I think he went a little ageist. I know it's a weird thing to say, but it's true. I think there are people that are in their 70s that are not adults, and there's people that are in their 20s that are more adult than some of the people that are in their 50s. I don't like going there because age doesn't always mean you're more mature. That's just a thing that I don't prescribe to. So I don't like the shot. I think Mitchell kind of needs to just pull his head in, go, you know what? The players, they handled it on the field. There wasn't anything that came out of it. Do I disagree with what he did? Yes. And then move on. Don't throw more fuel, don't more throw any more petrol into the proverbial fire here. Again, Ford did what they needed to do. Kenny got him up and about, but I worry that I think they used their best performance for this game, which then led to what happens in the preliminary final. We jump up to NG Stadium. I'm sorry, Rick, I hate to do this, but the Lions get a 5-point win, 105-101. But I mean, if you look at this game through the score word, I mean, how the hell did GWS lose another one with a 40-point lead? I mean, Rick, I know you watch this like a hawk. What
Yeah.
happened? Because I know they're coming off the low that is the loss to the Swans in that quality final, which was a sensational game. But this was, I mean, it was almost a carbon copy. It was kind of scary.
Yeah, not just missed opportunities. We weren't smart enough with the footy and just couldn't keep the usual suspects from the Lions from overpowering us when it mattered. And yeah, I mean, like it was a tough pill to swallow, and blowing a lead is never fun, regardless of how big it is. But yeah, I mean, like it is a little bit of solace knowing that Brisbane, the eventual champs, you can kind of take that on the chin and be like, oh, well, Brisbane really did rip through Sydney. We played Sydney very close and, have had more than our share of wins over Sydney as well in the last few years. But yeah, I mean, seeing what the Lions did in the grand final and also just picking apart Geelong in the way they did so dramatically in the prelim, again, I can kind of live with it. And also knowing that GWX's premiership window is still open. We've got a really good core. Year 3 under Kingsley, that window is still very open. So it's really unfortunate, but great season for Jesse Hogan, of course, taking out the Coleman. Overall, just very positive about. We definitely had more than our share of highlights, but yeah, this is going to be something that we're going to have to learn from, and try to just position ourselves better to hold on to those lay leads next time.
All right, Palmy, your thoughts on the Brisbane Lions' incredible comeback over GWS?
This was a phenomenal game, wasn't it? This was we had some good finals, and this was it. And there was a little subplot here, wasn't there? There was Hogan versus Danaher, both top 10 picks, both moved on. Lots of question marks. Will they ever fulfill their potential? They had days out. You had the Coleman medalist versus Big JD, and then you had the two most unlikable footballers in the history of the game, Toby Green and Dane Zorko, and they went for it as well. They went for it. Both of them were front and center of it, and it was a game, wasn't it? That really it shows character. At half time, you thought, right, the Giants, they're going to kick on. They went out and absolutely decimated that third quarter, and halfway through, you were like, okay, this is game over. That third quarter, you were like, GWS finally done it. And Brisbane, the character showed, didn't it? It just shows I'm a big advocate of just experience, and opportunistic sometimes is one of the most unheralded data points in the league. And Joe Danaher's fourth quarter, he dragged his team over and since gone on to retire. But I think that will probably be the most played 10 minutes of football in Joe Danaher's retirement. People will go back to that. And that was a man that his team needed something, and he brought the game back on his terms. And yeah, that was a hell of a game. That was worthy of being a grand final. That game, that's the grand final we wanted.
Nope, 100% with you on that one. We'll jump over to the preliminary finals, and let's get it out of the way, because Port Adelaide came up, and I kept hearing it all week. 8 in a row. Port Adelaide has won 8 in a row over Sydney, including 3 at the SCG. And I kind of in the back of my head went, well, I didn't I hear this record when it came to GWS being 3-0 against the Sydney Swans in finals? And what was the result of that particular game? I know, again, Sydney comes back and wins it late, but I kept hearing it all week. 7 in a row. Port Adelaide, 7 in a row. And I went, man, they are putting the proverbial jinx on Port Adelaide, and man, did it come true as Sydney just obliterated Port Adelaide with a 36-point win, 95-59. But I'm going to say this, as much as Sydney was good, Port Adelaide was horrible because, I mean, Travis Boak had a few mares that literally cost his team 2 goals. So many times they went into the corridor and turned the ball over. This was almost as much Sydney winning as Port Adelaide beating themselves. Palmy, your thoughts on this? Because again, I was worried about this game because I kept like 7 in a row, including the 110-point smashing earlier in the year.
Yeah, this was Sydney at their comfortable best, wasn't it, really, this game? And Port did look like what we said about Brisbane and our fears for the grand final. It felt like their grand final was the week before to beat Hawthorn. Port looked out on their legs, and it was one of them games that, aside from Burgoyne kicking the first, after that, I don't think Sydney ever had to get out of gear three. Real efficient performance by them, and at this stage, when I watched this game, I was ready to give the flag to Sydney, I have to say. I was like, okay, Sydney have found their groove, they're in cruise control, and this is the Sydney that we've watched all year, that we've kind of been like, God, they're good, because they just looked every department, backline, midfield, on the ball, contest, spreading
Yeah.
the play. They just looked a class above, and it was funny how fickle the AFL works because the week before
Mhm.
Ken Hinkley was in the press, he's done the miracle that they've got to re-sign him. Could this be the year? And almost as soon as that final siren went, the rumours started coming back
Mhm.
Yeah.
of is it time Hinkley gets sacked? I feel sorry for Hinkley because he is the most sacked coach in the off season, probably of AFL history.
Mhm.
We can't help but sack him. Even I do it. Even in my shows,
I
I'm like,
know.
when are they getting rid of him? So, but great game, great game for Sydney. It was a poor showing after the week they had the before though from
Mhm.
Port.
Yep,
Yeah, I
100%.
think yeah, no, spot on there. I think yeah, pretty clinical Sydney performance. They won every quarter. They kicked at pretty accurately. It was Amarty had 3 goals, Patley had 3 goals. Heaney was best on ground. Like it was what we expected to see from Sydney in the home and away season. But yeah, in hindsight, it's yeah, like Donnie was saying, it was kind of, Fort just didn't pack their bags for the flight, and Sydney was kind of able to put them away pretty early. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think I don't know if it's a question of the Swans getting too comfortable, but again, in retrospect, it makes you think.
It's the hindsight part. Like if
Yeah,
if you ask most people going after that game finished before and like in that 24 hours between the end of the Sydney game and the start of the Brisbane game, many people were like, okay, Sydney just showed us why they have a really good shot of winning the flag. They just dismantled a Port team that beat the best team going into the finals record wise at the time. It's completely understandable. And then you hit this game against Geelong and Brisbane, and you also look at how the game played out. It didn't surprise me that people were going, did Brisbane use too much energy to get to the grand final again after coming close and beating GWS and then having a roller coaster game against the Cats where they get it's a 10-point margin, but honestly, Brisbane kicked another goal late that really kind of expanded this margin. It should have been under a goal. This was an incredible game. I mean, I'm looking at the score worm now and it looks like a roller coaster because both teams have good moments, both teams have bad moments, and and Brisbane have to sit there and go, like, you beat a really good team on the MCG, which has been a house of horrors for the Lions at times. So this is an incredible game again. This is a Cats team that every year they get put down as too old, too slow, not good enough. This year it was not experienced enough or too injury riddled. Man, they played a heck of a game. Brisbane just a little bit too much. Again, Cam Rayna coming up with a big goal. Cal Archie, who for some weird reason has just blossomed since he's been pushed forward this year. Brisbane so good, a 10-point win, 95-85. Rick, an incredible game of football. It was fantastic to watch this game and did, despite the great effort, put a little bit of fear into some people because this showed how good Brisbane can be.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think everybody who's familiar with footy knows you don't want to run into a Chris Scott team in September because
Mhm.
we know how lethal they can be. But yeah, I mean, this was just, back and forth affair, like you said, between Danaher and Hawkins. Of course, Hawkins is retiring, Danaher is too. There's going to be some changes at both clubs, but so this kind of did feel like the end of an era or, the end of a chapter between, two teams who were always competitive and on their best days really entertaining September. So, yeah, I mean, Brisbane hung in there. They knuckled down. Achi, again, he's been sensational. He, could have won the Norm Smith if they actually gave it forwards. But yeah, I think flipping him forward was fantastic. He's kind of got some similarities to Zach Bailey in terms of being able to go forward and kick a goal and just kind of be physical around the contest. So, I mean, yeah, Brisbane really, they fired on all cylinders when it mattered. And I think being able to, go on the road and beat Geelong in the way that they did in pretty dramatic fashion, I mean, that's, kind of, again, with hindsight, it's kind of like they got the monkey off their back and they beat Geelong because Geelong's super experienced. They're so hard to play in finals. They're such a veteran side, but yeah, I mean, Achi had a few goals. Charlie Cameron did his thing, and Kyle Elman, who of course is probably Danaher's heir apparent in terms of being their next big key forward. I think the Lions were kind of just trying to get things started and just provide a really great proof of concept win that could build some more momentum till the grand final, and then they showed up on grand final day too. So yeah, it was something where they had to knuckle down and really fight for every last scrap of the footy, but they got it done.
Definitely for sure. And we'll jump to it. The day of days, the big daddy of them all, the grand final. And unfortunately, as competitive as this finals were, the grand final was far from it because after quarter time, it was pretty much Lions and Lions and Lions as a 60-point win, 120-60. The Lions get their premiership. Joe Danaher goes out on top as not even a few weeks after this grand final, he decides to hang up his boots. I mean, I watched this game in its entirety. After the first quarter, it was over. And I hate saying, and I really do hate saying that, but after this, when it hit halftime, it was over. It was completely and utterly dusted. The second half was purely just we're playing it out because we have to. I mean, if there would have been a mercy rule, it would have happened. Just that second quarter absolutely destroyed the Swans, giving up 7 goals in that quarter. It invokes some PTSD for some Swans fans because of what happened when Geelong did the same thing to them in the same quarter that second quarter got away from them. I mean, I'm not going to make any excuses. I'm not going to sit here and say that. The Lions were the better team on the day. They performed their best possible performance they possibly could, and the Swans just could not run with them. So I will not make any excuses. Congratulations, Brisbane Lions, flag winners, very well earned. Tough for me as a Swans fan and some of the Swans fans that I know. But unlike some, I'm not going to jump to conclusions and start trying to fire a horse or yada yada. They just had a bad day at the worst possible time. It really stinks, but it happens, unfortunately. So, Palmy, your thoughts on the grand final? Like I said, a little bit anticlimactic with an easy win for the Brisbane Lions.
It was indeed. I watched the pre-game build-up the day before, and I felt like there was a weird energy coming from Sydney, almost like a fight. Like I'm a big boxing man, and sometimes I think a boxer can be too fired up.
Mhm.
Like it starts to become an emotional thing for them, not a business thing. And
Mhm.
I watched them do the whole cup holding and just horses mannerisms and the captain's mannerisms. It felt like there was a genuine animosity towards Lockie Neal and the Brisbane boys. The way you saw Horse try and get the players away from that as quickly as possible as soon as the photos had gone. And there was a little thing in my mind going, are you guys a little bit want it too much? Because I do believe you can want it too much. And then the game started and it looked like it was going to be a real good toe-to-toe affair. Both sides looked good. Brisbane were a bit wasteful in that first quarter,
Hmm.
but after quarter time, like I know you said half time it was over. I felt it was over 5 minutes into the second. Brisbane suddenly looked twice as fast. They'd found ways to spread
Hmm.
Sydney, which we know is the question mark about Sydney. Narrow ground at the SCG, all that malarkey. It never seems to work when you play them though, but Brisbane were textbook there. They were looking to get the ball moving quickly, and by the end, they're one of them ones that are hard to come back from. We always say this when a team gets absolutely destroyed in a final. With all due respect to Sydney, that's quite a hard one. But it is worth noting when we had the bye, Brisbane were 13th.
Hmm.
So Sydney and Brisbane had the bye at the same time. It was first by a long way,
Yeah.
13th. And people were talking about Fagan being sacked,
Hmm.
bottom four.
Yeah.
Like, what a remarkable turnaround. And young Will
Hmm.
Ashcroft, the
Yes.
youngest Norm Smith medalist in AFL era, obviously second to Wayne Harms. Phenomenal comeback from him as well. ACL last year. People were saying, will he ever come back again? What a moment for him. And it was a good final. It won't have been for you, Donny, but
Hmm.
I thoroughly enjoy. I kind of like a battering in a final. I'm a bit different. I kind of
I
like
mean,
it, like killer
yeah.
instinct, bit of killer instinct.
It's fine.
Yeah, I
Like
think,
it's
well, I
yeah.
mean, in terms of like, oh, wow, Brisbane is putting the rest of the league on notice, making a real statement win. Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Tommy. And
Hmm.
I think, yeah, it's at some point with the Swans, like, again, the psychological aspect of being belted in a grand final, but to lose two grand finals in 3 years in heartbreaking fashion, it's just, and I don't think it's an indictment of force or their structure or their style, but Brisbane caught them so flat-footed. Like you said, we saw that second quarter. It was shocking in terms of
Hmm.
how the line is just shot right out of the gate like a cannon in right after quarter time, and then it was off to the races, and the route was on. And like you said, Ashcroft being the youngest Norm Smith medalist ever, he's the ripe old age of 20, and hey, he's already got one over his dad because his
Hmm.
dad won 3 flags. He did not win a Norm Smith. So yeah, that's I mean, 30 touches, like you said, coming back from the ruptured ACL. What a great story. And, again, in terms of, kind of like how Chris Fagan is a great story. He was patient, worked his way up through the Taffy State League, got into the AFL, worked under Clarko, and then finally got a chance to do it his way in Brisbane. And patience paid off. They finally broke through for a flag. Now, where do they go from here? With Danaher's retirement, are they really going to be able to run it back and maybe be top four or be a premiership contender again? I think it's possible. I think they're definitely in great position, but the albatross of high expectations, as we know, it's so hard to win back-to-back flags. It's such a long season, but you know they're in a good position in terms of retaining the majority of their talent. Obviously, losing Danaher sucks. Jared Lyons retired. They're going
Hmm.
to have to replace a few guys, and Zorko is going to be what 36 next season. So
Hmm.
he'll probably only be around for a few more years. But again, having Lohman in the forward line to really be the heir to Danaher if they keep IG forward next year, I think that's great. And then also just like some of the other guys who've really, come through that system. Of course, Matt McInerney did not play the grand final, but yeah, I mean, I saw something. Let me pull it up on my phone. Actually, saw something on Fox Footy just the other day saying could the Lions be even better next year because not only are they going to have Will Ashcroft, Levi Ashcroft is probably going to be the father's son. Sam Marshall is going to be a Brisbane Academy prospect, probably a first round choice too. McInerney, of course, he'll be back from his shoulder injury. Tom Duday, he'll be back from his ACL. Caden Coleman will be back from his ACL. Darcy Gardner's back from his ACL, and then Lincoln McCarthy too. So
Hmm.
there were a bunch of really good guys that are normally in their 22 who didn't make the grand final, and I think they'll still definitely be in the mix.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting again. Like I've heard that the only thing I'm worried about is do they have too many ponies in the midfield stables for all of the guys to get it? Like Levi is just as good. Levi is just as good as Will. But right now, who do you take out to put him in? I mean, you've already got McCluggage, you've got Neal, you've got Will, you've got
Well, it's a good problem to
so
have.
many. But the problem is, could it be a bad problem? Because then you got a bunch of stallions in your paddock, and you can't get them all games. So that's unless you shift Eli to a half forward line. But right now, you lost a full forward. You can tuck Hipwood into the full forward line, but who comes in? Lincoln McCarthy is not a full forward. He's a forward pocket. He's a small forward. If Levi goes forward, he's a small forward. He's not a tall. So do you shift somebody around? So it, I agree with people that yes, could Brisbane be better next year? But the other scary part that you think about is that they may be better, but are they getting better in spots that they're already good and they don't have space to put another guy in? So it's great to get Levi Ashcroft in, but again, who are you taking out? And do you see a Cam Reyna or a Zach Bailey moving into the midfield? Because if you do that, well, there's another person to go in there. So I, again, I get it. It's great for Brisbane, but you also got to look at it too, is that Danaher is a huge loss because you saw what impact he made. Hipwood is not that player. There is nobody, maybe Logan, maybe Morris, the young kid, but we'll have to see. I mean, you've already got Kai Loman there. So there's a lot of really good pieces for this Brisbane Lions team. The question will be is can they fit everybody in and does it mess with them next year? Because again, they're going to be the hunted next year, not the hunter. And sometimes when you win a flag, there isn't that much hunger the next year. So
Yeah, like with Colin.
yep. Yep. It'll be very, very interesting for sure. So that is it for the finals. We've talked to it. We'll get to the burning questions. I want to have a little bit of fun. I have a question pretty much for each of us. We will start with Pommy. We will start with you, sir. Your beloved Patrick Cripps is the Brownlow medal winner, taking home the Brownlow with 45 votes. And after this Brownlow count, I kept hearing this discussed. So I'm interested as a Blues man yourself. Was this count and 45 votes for Crippa good or bad for the competition?
Yeah, the Brownlow every year always makes me laugh because maybe I've got some rare ability of self-awareness, but I mean, every game I watch, I complain about the umpire's decisions, but yet we expect them to pick 3-2-1 of every game just after it's spot on.
And get it
And
perfectly right. Yep.
yeah, do you know what I mean? It just always amuses me. Everyone blows up about it. Is it good for the game? I mean, of course it is. I mean, I said it pre the Brownlow. We talked. You've had Nick Dacos, who's had an absolute phenomenal year.
Mhm.
Absolute phenomenal year. I can't admire Nick Dacos enough, and that's coming from a Carlton fan. I loved him in the draft. Still stand by. He was head and shoulders above all of his peers. And
Mhm.
I'll stand by, having watched the draft closely for 10 years, in the top two of draftees I've ever seen. Like, he's that good. But then we talked about Cripps pre the Brownlow and saying that if you take 2017 as the best ever attacking midfielder as Dustin Martin, it would be fair to say Cripps' year this year has been close to the best ever defensive minded extractor of a ball. And
Mhm.
it's ugly. In my game, football in the UK, Rodri will never get the love that Bruno Fernandes, Kevin De Bruyne get because they make
Mhm.
it look sexy, where the other guys get winning the ball back and doing all the other ugly stuff.
Mhm.
Is it 45 votes? It's probably a lot. Is it the greatest year of all time? If you're using the Brownlow as a metric to define skill level, well, with the all due respect, you're an idiot. Like
Mhm.
it's
Nope, I
three
agree.
votes in a game. Like I think yes, that's how it curtailed. I think that's more of a detriment. And how I took it as a Carlton fan is how he polled in the losses, how he polled in the bad games. That's
Mhm.
more of a detriment to Carlton's midfield. That it's again Patrick Cripps coming into the twilight of his career, being the man that stands up again. And I said it doing the Brownlow watch along. If I'm Walsh, if I'm Chera, if I'm Hewitt, if I'm these players, I'm looking at this and going, he shouldn't have got 45 votes if we'd rose, if
Mhm.
we helped him.
Completely agree.
And that's why Bont doesn't win. That's why Bont doesn't win it. He's got 3 or 4 players around him who will
Yeah,
kick butt every week.
Before you
yeah.
hop in, Rick, I will say that I was screaming at some of the podcasts I was listening to. Everybody's like, Bond's got a great. I said, Trelaw had the best season he's ever had. If you think Bond's gonna win, if you think Bond's gonna win it with the way Trelaw was playing this year, you need your head examined. Like Bond was good, okay? I'm not gonna disrespect
Oh,
Bond. Bond had a great season. Trelaw was the best midfielder for the doggies this entire season. And anybody that says otherwise did not watch the game. Did Bond have more impact on the game? Absolutely. But Trelaw was everywhere for that doggies midfield. Trelaw was the best midfielder on that team, and the votes showed it. I get it. Okay. Bond's sexy because he does some of the things, as they said, with the Dusty Martins, that he kicks goals, he makes impact. But there were games he disappeared when they really needed it. And Trelaw came up with 5 or 6 disposals in the fourth quarter that led to doggies wins. So I just, it really irritated me. Sorry, Rick. I didn't mean to jump in before you, but
you're
really
good.
irritated me. I kept hearing so many people, Bond's got to win it. Bond's got to win it. Bond's biggest issue is he's had McRae, he's had Trelaw, he has the guys around him poll and English polled a couple of years ago. That's his issue. He's got too many good players around him. So it's almost an indictment a little bit, as Pommy said on the Carlton midfield. It's like you've got some really good ones. Sam Walsh is there, Georgie Hewitt's there, Kenny's there, Chera's there. How are these guys not polling? So it is kind of almost an indictment with as good a midfield as Carlton has, that he can pick up 45 votes over the season.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you. And it's it's definitely, I don't want to say it's bad for the competition, but yeah, whenever there's a massively lopsided vote where there probably shouldn't have been, like you said, Pommy, I would have been fine with Dacos. I've got tons of respect for Dacos, but yeah, it feels like, I mean, I think Cripps was deserving, but again, it's like, did he deserve the 45 vote margin? I'm not so sure.
Probably
So
not. Probably not. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just, again, and then my favorite part is like, again, coming from over here in the States, and again, Rick, you probably see this. I mean, there is no other sport that I can think of where the umpires make any kind of call on anything except for what's their adjudication for the refereeing. So for me, it's just this oddball, basically medal that's handed out that I will never, it will never make sense to me. Like the Brownlow, and again, I try not to discuss this. For me personally, I think there should be a group of 5 people that's watching every single game and they do the votes. Personally, that's what I think it should, because I think it would be much more accurate on the distribution of votes. I think the umpires are very easily manipulated because of who's around the ball, because of all of the running that they have to do. That's, again, me personally. It'll never happen because there's too many purists, shall we say? But it's just, it was rather,
right.
it's rather
Well,
funny.
speaking of the purists, I mean, they could always switch up the voting system,
Yeah.
the 3-2-1 system or
I've
whatever
heard the
it's
5-4-3-2-1 system has been
right. Yeah, I
discussed, but I
mean,
think that would just
it's
be
been
more of a
changed.
headache.
It's been changed before, but it's not like footy fans want change, and that's fine. But like, I mean, in terms of like, there's been ways to shake up the voting system in the past that maybe the AFL could turn to, but I don't know, probably
Yeah. So
It's one of them
definitely
ones,
go
like
ahead.
the two things I'll say on this is one, speak to anyone after a game. Like I always look at it this way with the umpires. When you speak to anyone after the game, I would say the most nonsense I hear as a content creator is straight after the game of which player played well, right?
Mhm.
And it's always the last 10 minutes. Like no one remembers the intercept mark that took the mick. And I always say that you've got to get yourself in the mindset of the umpire. He's walked off the ground. He's not remembering the 3 ground balls at halfback. He's
Mhm.
remembering the burst through the stoppage. But the second one, people look at this, and I'm humble enough to say, as a footballer, Nick Dacos is more exciting, is probably more attacking than Cripps. But I have this conversation with my mates in the UK all the time about our football. The best player is so ambiguous, and in my opinion, I'll say this to the fans at home. If you were North Melbourne, who's better for your team? Patrick Cripps or Nick Dacos? Because Nick Dacos is great when he's got the ball and it's been given to him and he's got someone to extract it. Cripps wins his own ball. And I always play this game with like Lionel Messi. If you put Lionel Messi at Lincoln City, is he going to be doing what he does for Barcelona, for top teams?
Mhm.
But lesser loved players like Cripps is probably going to do what he does. Cripps is going to have them numbers at 18 clubs. Nick Dacos gets them numbers 4 or 5 clubs in the league.
Mhm.
So it's
Good way.
always a real interesting one for me when people say, "Oh, that means Cripps is better than Dacos." No, it doesn't. It means Cripps stands out more than
Mhm.
Dacos
Yeah,
in the games he played. Dacos wasn't
Exactly.
playing them.
Yep.
right.
And it's again, it's nothing because each player is a little bit different. Each one has their little niches in the sport. And again, I don't go far as to say, well, some people are like, well, Nick Dacos is soft. He's not soft. He's just really, really smart. He's kind of like an eel. He knows where he can and can't go. That's going to be beneficial for him. He's a smart footballer. He doesn't go into places that are going to cause him to take damage. He's almost kind of like the Floyd Mayweather of footy. He does what he needs to do at just the right way. I will give that kid so much credit on that. He doesn't take unnecessary punishment that he doesn't have to. But sometimes he will miss out on certain contests that some of the guys like a Cripps, like a Tom Green at GWS, they're going to go full bull mode and they're just going to go through it. Nick Dacos, maybe he'll slither around on the outside. So I,
Yeah,
again, 45 votes. I think it's a tiny bit a little bit excessive personally. Again, the fact that Nick Dacos would have won in every other Brownlow except this one was it just kind of showed you how absurd the votes were a little bit. I know people dove through and like there was one that Cripps got that he only had 13 disposals and was only like 20% disposal efficiency. And it shows you how the umpires can be easily tricked if certain things happen, kind of like what Pommy said, is that it's the last 5 minute, it's the what have you done for me lately type of moments for the footy that sometimes will get it going. So I wrote this question before I found out about Joe Danaher. So I'm interested to see, will this change your answer a little bit? Brisbane have the flag. Could we see the beginning of the Brisbane dynasty, especially due to, as we discussed a little bit earlier, Levi Ashcroft and some really good youngsters potentially coming into an already flag premiership group? Palmy, your thoughts. Are we seeing a Brisbane dynasty, or do we see like Collingwood last year where they're going to take a year lull because of the lack of hunger?
I think Danaher's a loss, no doubt about it. I also think their draft predicament, they've got pick 16 and then some naff picks to say, and they've got to do 2 bids. Ashcroft should be pick 1, but the AFL's corrupt, so we'll see a pick around 4 because the NAB need to give 50k to whoever the pick 1 is. And Sam Marshall's going to probably come into that late teens, early 20s, so they can't really do anything. Is that Logan Morris? I'm a big fan of. I look at their young players, and although Danaher's a great player, I think Hipwood has served his apprenticeship to some extent. You've got Brandon Ryan there as well as a stopgap, which will protect Logan Morris again. But Logan Morris has been sensational since there. So I think they've still got it. And people are also forgetting Dodie. He was that big
Yeah, dude, yeah.
off-season signing, and the poor bloke got injured. I think that makes their backline instantly better. Is it a dynasty? I think the dynasty this season's shown this is the hardest season to win, and I suspect, looking at Geelong's off-season, looking at all the other teams are getting better, so it's going to be tough. But Brisbane, what, they're 7th oldest in the league now. They've won a flag. They're right in the purview, and I don't buy this Premiership hangover. I think Premiership hangovers can be explained. We, as human beings, being dedicated to science, we still live in that world of mythical, and there's got to be something magic happening. I think sometimes what happens is you nailed it earlier, Donny, that cultural shift from being the hunter to suddenly hunted. That's very hard. And I always use the boxing analogy. When you've won the flag, that is like 12 right rounds for the title. You've won 11. Your coach in the 12th round just says, all you've got to do, son, don't get knocked out. That's quite daunting to go out and box for 3 minutes. However, all the other clubs are the other coach. you've lost this fight. Swing for the fences. Hopefully hit his chin. If you knock him out, you win it. That's a pretty easy place to be in that corner of being told all you can do is win. You've already lost. So that's going to be a big thing for Brisbane. Teams are going to want that scout, particularly early doors. Your weaker teams are going to be like, if we can beat Brisbane, this is the energy starter. And you see it all the time with Collingwood last year. The weaker teams saw this as a grand final, a chance to really kickstart it. So it's going to be tough for them, but well coached side, and there's talent everywhere, isn't there? Kitty Coleman to come back, and tell you what, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if Kitty Coleman didn't get injured. He was sensational at the start.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Nope.
most definitely.
100%.
Yeah. No, I think they could. There's definitely potential. Like, some of the younger guys that we haven't mentioned already. Jimmy Tunstall's a guy. I know he's played like 6 or 7 career games, but they already extended him. I know Jackson Pryor is a guy that, has shown plenty of flashes. Darcy Wilmot, I think he's still just 20 years old. I think he could really start to really blossom once he gets more games under his belt. And yeah, I think, and we already mentioned Logan Morris. I think the young nucleus that they have is going to be ready to kind of rise to the occasion next year. Am I penciling them as back-to-back flag contenders? No, but I definitely think they're top 4 heading into next year. And of course, and we saw 0-3, 0-4. That doesn't phase. So you'd hope they would get off to a quicker start in 2025. But yeah, I mean, the core talent is there. I guess I would personally be, if I'm a Lions fan, I would personally be a little more concerned with, Chris Fagan being 63 and him being the oldest coach in the comp, if I'm not mistaken. And, he's obviously got a few more years left on his deal, but you wonder if, like, can they really start a dynasty, with a 63-year-old coach, and there's not yet a succession plan in place. But, I think when Fagan does call time, you'd hope that they would be in a position to contend for the future. Also, speaking of Brisbane's coaching staff, you guys probably saw that Steely Do got promoted to a full-time job in the football department after the season. So congrats to him, and I'm sure he'll be a key part of what they're doing heading forward.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that they hired him and they went like 8-2 after they hired him, because I know it'd be interesting. I I'm hesitant to jump on the dynasty because of the fact that you have free agency. And then, like I said, I wrote this before Danaher decided to retire. Like if Danaher comes back, it's difficult to see how Brisbane gets beat a lot, because again, the biggest question will be is, does Zorko decide to hang up the boots? Because what do they do with Zorko when Kitty Coleman comes back? Because Zorko took Kitty Coleman's spot. What Zorko was doing was what Kitty Coleman was doing the year before. So when Kitty comes back, does Zorko get moved, or does Kitty Coleman get moved around? There's some things. Duday is not a tall defender, so and he's injury prone too. And you've already got Wilmot, you've already got Starcevich, you've already got some good small defenders that already do a lot. So it's like what they're bringing in is great, but really, where do they fit? That'll be the biggest thing. And then again, how does Oscar McInerney come back after the shoulder? Hopefully, I don't think the shoulder needed surgery, which is good, because then it won't be as long of a recovery. But it's I hate going to Dynasty because there's a lot of really good teams. Hawthorn looks to be scary good. If they can get both Barras and Battle in, they could be really good. Sydney, it'll be interesting to see how they handle it with Luke Parker's departure, which actually I'll just use that as my great transition to the next question. Was the Swans fall by another big margin in a grand final for you guys? Does there need to be big changes, or is this just one of those where it's just a bad day at the bad time, at the wrong time? Rick, I'll start with you.
It's hard to judge. Like I said earlier, I don't think it was a coaching issue with Horse. I don't think it was, like, oh, we've been on this stage before, we know what to expect, let's just treat it like another day at the office. And it wasn't. They really did get out muscled, out physical, however you want to put it, against Brisbane. So yeah, it's one of those, pop the hood, check the engine, see what you can do to fix it and fix it quickly. know, like because obviously we know how well the Swans draft. They've got so much great young talent coming through the mid, coming through the forward line, but when guys like Heaney or Parker or whoever just don't show up when it matters, I think that just leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And again, we talked about the slow quarters or the moments where Sydney, even when they were looking great in the home and away season, just fizzled out random. And I remember thinking it at the time, it's like, this is concerning come September because, like, when Sydney can put four quarters together, like they did against Port Adelaide, damn, it's very, very fun to watch. But I don't know what it's going to take in terms of like it's almost a Port Adelaide technically situation, right? Where you've got a veteran coach who's been there for many years. The window is closing; it's not quite shut. But when you have that many, even if it's not bad finals losses, when you lose that many finals games on the big stage, it is tough to bounce back from because and Brisbane is a great example. Like this, when you think someone's left for dead or counted out, everyone's lines at 0-3, 0-4, but boom, they hit the next gear. They had all these depth guys who stepped up when Coleman got hurt, when McInerney got hurt. Everyone did their role perfectly, it seems. And I don't think the Swans are there yet. I'm not sure if it's one thing or if it's a bunch of small things. It's just something that there's something intangible they're missing because we know how good they are in paper. We know how well they draft. The Swans Academy produces great kids too. They've got a good system in place, but what else do they need? It's kind of like with Ford. They're always in September. What else do they need to actually get over the top? And unfortunately, when you're a non-Victorian team trying to shine on the brightest stage at the MCG, you're automatically under a bigger microscope because the narrative is always, oh, how does this interstate team play at MCG? When at the end of the day, we know, regardless of the size of field, if you don't show up in every quarter, you're going to get run off the park like the Swans did. So I think it's going to be some soul searching this offseason. Losing Parker to a team like North, that stings, but they've got the depth and the pieces to kind of cover for that. But in terms of like what's the character of this group? How do they respond to, again, 2 bad losses in a grand final in 3 years? That takes a toll psychologically, but do they have the mental toughness to really attack the offseason as hard as possible and then get off to a fast start and start, cementing a top 4 spot early in 2025?
It'll definitely be interesting. Palmy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be there or thereabouts. I mean, you look at Sydney, 1922 in the draft. That helps because, I mean, this is a draft that everyone wants to trade into, very deep from 15 to 30 as well. Is that something that Sydney are going to spring a surprise? I look at their list, though. I don't see any holes. Like, they've got the team there. They've got the team that can compete. Is it a bad day at the office for Sydney in the final? I always do think that being minor premier seems to be the only league in the world that sustained consistency isn't rewarded. See Geelong win the minor premiership all the time. It seems balmy that you spend 24 weeks being the best side in the world only to potentially get knocked out to a side that's only played well for 4 weeks. But I think Sydney they'll recruit well. They've got young Cochrane as one of their NGAs this year, so that comes in 19 and 22. Knowing Sydney, they bring in the Whitlock twins or something like that, both ends of the ground, and they go again. Be interesting what they do because I don't think I'll look at the guys you're losing. I know we touched on Luke Parker. Spent a lot of time in the VFL though, hasn't he, this year? And when he's been in the VFL, he's enjoyed punching 18-year-olds. So that's exactly what North need. North need that physicality and a bit of thuggery. I look at Sydney now, and it's time for them to step up, isn't it? And you're going to learn a lot about Sydney because, as we said, there is that. I think the biggest hangover is getting beaten in a grand final. I don't think winning it is a bad thing. I think getting beaten big. We've seen it with Adelaide. We saw it with GWS. When it goes one-sided, I think the instinct is to get too creative and too intricate. hopefully Horse, and I'm sure he will just go, this is the list. This list can win. We were rubbish and we've got to own it and come back strong. But that midfield, it's tasty, isn't it? Chad Warner, like, oh,
Yeah,
Isaac Heaney.
they've got such great athletes there. It's just such a great list on paper.
Here's the thing that I look at it. I 100% agree with you that I think the Luke Parker's loss, as much as some people are making it like, I think it's the heart and soul part of the fans that are gonna hate seeing Luke go. But if you really look at the way this season went, Luke, almost like Callum Mills, the same thing. Like they weren't part of the majority of the really good time during the season. So I don't think it's as big as loss as somebody makes out. The biggest question will be is that now there's all of these rumors of, does Chad Warner want to go back west? Does he want to come back home? That'll be the $1 million thing, because I've heard some people saying, well, this could almost be the perfect time for Sydney to trade him because they get the most from him, especially with Fremantle having 3 first-round picks. Could Sydney throw a spanner in the works and go, hey, Fremantle, here you go, have him. Now you guys get to deal with that contract extension next. We won't have to worry about it. We draft in a very deep draft. I don't think it'll happen. Honestly, I think Sydney want to keep him. I think Sydney's still pretty confident they can re-sign him. I think a little bit of the wanting to go home is a little bit of the West Coast, a little bit of the Western Australian media trying to stir up to get that going. Again, I don't know. I mean, it'd be great if he stays. If he goes, I completely understand it. But this is a group that is still relatively young. You've got Angus Sheldrick in the VFL that I think is very good. Caden Cleary showed flashes this season despite forward, but when he played in the NAB league was a really good down and under midfielder. There's a lot of depth. The question will be is, can they figure out the perfect thing with Logan McDonald and Joel Armati and Logan McLean, and can they play all three, or do they need to go smaller and bring in a small forward? Will we see Joel Hamling make his Swans debut next year because of how well he did in the VFL going forward? Defensively, how do they handle defenders? Because we know Dane Rampy's career is getting closer and closer, besides the fact he likes to jump and climb poles like he did against Essendon. How do they bring in a replacement for him? Because when he didn't play this year, you could tell it really screwed up their connection, because there was very little communication when Rampy didn't play. That's when you saw the worst of the Sydney defense this season. Is Nick Blakey going to stay at that halfback flanker spot, or does he move forward up to the midfield? How does Campbell? There's a lot of, I agree with Pommy. I don't think there's a lot of holes, but there's a lot of question marks about how it's going to go further. I still think they've got a really good list. I still think they have a chance to win a premiership. The question is, Chad Warner is the biggest one. This next year is going to be interesting. Can they get him to re-sign a contract extension, or does he want to go home? Because if he goes home, that's going to change a lot of things when it comes to that Sydney midfield. It's going to be
Well,
very,
and also
very interesting.
like is Brody Grundy going to be able to replicate the instant success that he had coming in? Like he was a great story, third club. People kind of forgetting about him quickly, but yeah, he was able to really shine for the Swans. But he's 30 years old. What do they have in terms of the stocks below him and the long term succession plan in terms of getting the tall timber in there? Because they've got some great guys up forward, but in terms of the depth at rock, I do kind of worry for you guys there too.
They drafted Will Green, who was quite the good ruck in the NAB, and I know that they kind of let him develop. And Sydney's really good at letting youngsters who they really think have a good future but need just a little bit more seasoning. They'll let him VFL. He's the guy I'm looking at. I know they have Stretch McWalter, but I think he's a rugby guy that I'm not sure if he's going to pan out. So do they look at trying to bolster the ruck backups? Because again, Brody's going to be there a little bit just because of the contract. So I don't think which is kind of good because it lets Will Green proverbially marinate in the VFL. So we'll have to see how that goes. I'm interested. That is the one area right now for Sydney that always has been kind of the Achilles heel is their ruck. That's why they brought in Brody Grundy this last year. Unfortunately, was he the best Brody Grundy in the finals? No, I think he was okay. I think the grand final he was vastly below par of what he should have been against Darcy Fort. I know Darcy Fort is a good ruck. He's serviceable. He does what he needs to do. He's tamed Max Gone before, so it was the one worry that I think a lot of people they kind of disrespected Darcy Fort a little bit more than they probably should. I knew Darcy Fort could be a pain in the tail if he can physically move Brody Grundy around, which is what he did. And then Joe Danaher had his moments, and that kind of didn't help that Brisbane was getting the first hands on the footy for most of that particular game. So again, it'll be interesting to watch this Swans team go forward. How, because I know that uh their list man their the head of recruiting is retiring. So he's stepping down, and he's been kind of the Kinnear Beatson. I mean, if you talk to most Swans fans, they in Kinnear we trust. Like he makes a draft pick, and almost all the time you will never hear Swans fans go, "What is Kinnear thinking?" Almost all of us go, "He's got a plan. We're gonna let him go," because very rarely does Kinnear miss. Very rarely does he miss. Like I pointed that out this year after the Adelaide Crows game that everybody's like, it's all your academy players. And I go, you are aware only two of our academy players played in that game. And the guy that kicked 9 goals against you was a rookie call up, right? And it was my favorite part is they kind of go, I'm like, yeah. I'm like, Chad Warner was pick 40. Like there's several guys that are below 20 on the draft picks. Nice job. Yeah, only focus on the one part that you have a problem with. Good job. So all right, now that I've had my fun there, we'll reel it in, coach. All right, so last burning question, and this is interesting because again, I haven't been paying attention a long time to the AFL, but I have to say, for me, this was one of the best seasons ever. So, Palmy, I'll start with you. Was this the best season of AFL you have ever experienced?
Uh, well, I mean, I think yes. I think as a spectacle covering the greater AFL world, I've enjoyed this because I think it's the first time there's probably 15 teams that could beat any team. And I think it's been really tight. And I made the bold call at the bye. Whoever wins this flag probably has the claim that they've won the hardest flag to win. That because every week it just felt anyone who did tipping, if you got 9, I don't know about anyone else. I got a couple of 9s towards the end of the season. I felt like I was Nostradamus.
Exactly.
You know what
I
I
was
mean?
thinking the same. I had an 8-1. I had an 8-1 week, and I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was wild.
And you saw it, didn't you? It was just so tough, so tough. The standard was high. We didn't even see, I mentioned this when I did Carlton's round 24 preview. You've not seen as well what we've seen of years gone by where teams start to shelve players. Like Geelong, Chris Scott's the master of winning the minor premiership, but usually round 20, he's dropping an entire team. He's Everyone gets a rest because it's like guaranteed that he finishes top 2
Mhm.
right up till the end. Like the last day, we had like 4 teams could make the 8.
Mhm.
Like, so for me, yes, it was more of that because it didn't feel foregone. And it actually, even though the finals is the opposite, kind of was obvious who was going to get there. The whole 8 felt like it could have been 12 teams. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And next year, just looking at it now, I think there's only 2 teams I'm writing off, and that's Richmond and Eagles. I'm writing them straight off. Even North, to an extent, I could see North recruiting well and doing a mini Hawthorn and getting into that top 12. So there's only 2 teams I'm willing to underline right now. Won't win a flag, won't be in the 8. So it's
Mhm.
going to be a real interesting off season.
Yeah, it'll definitely
Agreed.
be interesting.
Agreed. I wouldn't say it was the best season. Well, I agree with you there, Palmy, in terms of like how unpredictable it was. We've all been there with like our tips just go completely haywire on us, and we have no idea what to do with ourselves. But yeah, it was very even. But at the same time, it also felt weird because, and again, with hindsight, Sydney was cemented at that top spot. And then it felt like spots 3 to 13 were just mediocrity. Shake them up in a can, roll the dice, and see where they land. But then of course, the season progresses, teams get healthier or more banged up. Teams kind of, can put together a little run if the footy bounces their way. So it was a weird competition from that level. It did feel like any team could upset pretty much anyone in any given week. But again, I can't say it was the best season so far. And the only reason I'm saying it is because the umpiring was all over the place, as we know. So it was just such a frustrating season because, I'm watching a tight game. Oh, no. They've effed up this free kick, or the score review system is not doing what it should be doing, or all these funny little quirks that we love as footy fans and cause so much frustration and high blood pressure. But I reckon it was as good of a competition in terms of the quality of footy, the ins and outs of the season. There's so many moving parts in footy, right? Every week, the 22 is going to be slightly different. Every week, the structure is going to be slightly different depending on the ground, depending on who's available on the bench. All these different elements and all these analytics that kind of come together. So, yeah, I think it was a really great back and forth, drama-filled season like we wanted, but can't say it was the best. I wish I could.
It was one of those series. It was one of those seasons where it just I am not a huge AFL 360, but I almost looked forward to every week to watch the Snakes and Ladders after around 6 because it just seemed like every single week somebody's dropping 4 positions, somebody's going up 2 positions, and then so many teams just intersecting or going from 6th, 12th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 4th, 5th. Like that was the way this season went. Like nobody really, except for Sydney, really, nobody sat in the same spot for a long period of time. I know Carlton, I think, sat in second for 5 or 6 weeks straight. But other than that, it didn't happen. Like you were constantly bouncing because of the way the results were. So I agree. I don't think it's the best because it was the most unpredictable. And for me, it's one of those the season, I agree with you. It was marred by all the controversies, but the thing that irked me off the most about this season was just how overreacting so many people were on so many little things. I'll point out one of the ones that really frustrated the crap out of me is that the week that we had the Toby Bedford tackle, and I can't remember what the other one was. And Jonathan Brown starts off the couch with the tackle is dead. And I went, really? Really, Jonathan Brown? How many suspended tackles were there? 3. How many tackles were that entire week? Probably north of 400. So less than 1% of the tackles were suspendable. All due respect, that's the stupidest thing ever uttered. The tackle is not dead in the league. The dangerous tackle is dying. Is it the science that we all want it to be to make these guys safe? No, because the AFL can't make up their mind what is and isn't a dangerous tackle. That's my issue that I have with it. Make it black and white. Stop skirting the outsides to try to save your own butt, okay? Make it clear, obvious, clear language. Stop with the vagaries because that's where you get this situation where Christensen's going, and then he can't make up his mind. And I swear he just flips a coin and goes, 3 games, flips a coin, 1 game. Like it literally became a crapshoot to the point where, as we said, Isaac Heaney gets that suspension that honestly, if you really look at it, was it suspendable because it was a hit high? Yes. Should it have been? Depends on who you talk to. So I think that was the part that was the most frustrating for me is that there was constantly controversies over some things that honestly were made such a big deal that if it was just written better, wouldn't have been. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. So let's have some fun, fellas. To end the year, I don't just want to go with the outro after the burning questions because, you know what? I like to have a little bit of fun. So we're going to review the season in some fun categories. Okay. So we'll start off for you guys, and it'd be very interesting to see player or team or whatever, something that goes along with this. What was your biggest disappointment for this season. Palmy, we'll start with you. Player, team. So what disappointed you? What was your biggest disappointment from this AFL season?
Carlton. Ma-
No surprise there.
yeah,
Wow, you
massive.
really jumped off a high ledge on that one.
Massively for me. When you look at Carlton's injuries, and it's something that I never give a pass for because
Mhm.
like the AFL, everything's got to be like mystical and like almost like you need to have Elon Musk levels of comprehension. But for me, being injured is the most basic thing in the world, right? Most basic thing in the world in all of sport. AFL is probably the only game that if a player is continually injured, we look at a different reason. But NBA, NFL, EPL in the UK, if a player's injured all the time, he's a lame duck. It's his fault. Do you know what I mean? It's his job. His body's let him down. Carlton's injuries at that bye point were almost barbaric. Adam Chera, what, 4 hamstrings in a row?
Yeah.
Whatever went on at Carlton Football Club this year, and I don't even think it's just injuries. I think at times we were just poor, but I look at that and just think that is the basics of sport, getting players on the park, and the Blues couldn't even do that. And then you're asking them to win contest and spread the ball and bring the ball to ground, and they can't even get players fit and available. For me, I felt this was a golden goose opportunity, second at round 20. Second, we were to limp into finals and do what we did. For me, yeah, it's massive disappointment. And we just beat Adelaide, in my opinion, as disappointing. We're just above Adelaide. Just.
All right, Rick. Biggest disappointment.
Well, Pommy stole my thunder there. I'm going with the Adelaide Crows. I mean, yeah, this was the proof of concept season. This is what Matty Nix had to do to justify Crows' faith in him. They've got a good list. It's not an elite list, but it's more than finals work. Hawthorne can make the A the Crows, right? And at the end of the day, that's what matters. So again, real soul searching off season for the Crows. They just picked up my guy Isaac Cumming from the Giants, so that's a good backline piece that they can kind of add to the mix. He's a South Australian boy, if I'm not mistaken, too,
Mm-hmm.
so gets to go home. So I mean, there's so much talent on that list. I think Phil Thorpe, if he can actually stay healthy, I think he's a great fit for them, their culture, the way they want to, the way they want to move the footy forward. But yeah, there's just not enough toughness in that footy club. There's not enough. I don't think there's enough accountability. I don't put that on Nix, but I think there's I don't think everyone's on the same page at the Adelaide Crows. And Nick, this coming season, it's obviously a must win. Otherwise, Nix will presumably get sacked. So yeah, I mean they've definitely left a lot to be desired based on some of the winnable games they could have gotten and just not making a move for the 8 when they could have earlier in the season. Then that gave them way too much ground to make up, and tough season for them.
See, and I really wanted to pick Adelaide, but I'm actually going to go with one. It's just more of, for me, a disappointment because this team is in the finals for a majority of the year and fell completely out, and that is Fremantle. And again,
Mm.
I say this more is because I think they started to show why they were finding that way to do it. They played some really good footy, but their inconsistencies really frustrated the crap out of me. I think they disappointed me because I looked at them and they get the win over Sydney the second time, and I thought, okay, they finally maybe figured it out. They finally got themselves settled, but they just could not perform when they needed to. I was more disappointed because I thought they really could have gave a crack into the finals if they would have got in, that I think it could have been quite interesting. Would it have changed a few things? Could Brisbane have been tested earlier in that first game? Unfortunately, in that first game, instead of Carlton again, and Carlton just they kind of went up there with a free hit because everybody was like they had to bring in so many players that you were pretty sure, unfortunately, were going to be underdone. So for me, it was Fremantle just because I thought I saw something in there that could have got them a top 4 spot, and they just continued to find ways to drop games that they really couldn't afford to.
Also, Donnie,
Go ahead.
Also, Don, you're forgetting they had that draw in round 11 against Collingwood. I think that hurt
Mhm.
them I mean, a draw, it's obviously going to hurt your percentage. Collingwood themselves had two draws, and that was one of the deciding factors in them missing the eight. But with Frio, I mean, that draw right in the middle of the season, when it did, I mean, and then they lose their last four. They lose
Mhm.
to Essendon, Geelong, GWS, and Port Adelaide. None of them by more than 20 points. So
Mhm.
to me, you're right. That's inconsistencies. That's just, like those are all winnable games, and they should have at least gotten two of them. So
Exactly.
yeah,
So
I think they definitely have a ways to go.
the biggest thing is they got to keep Sean Darcy healthy. They have to try to find a way to get him healthy or find a way to put him out to pasture so then Jackson can take over because when Jackson can play that kind of hybrid, go through the midfield, go through the forward role, I think he can make more of an impact than I think they want to give him credit for. And I don't think he's a number one ruck right now. I don't think it's there yet. You still need Darcy there, but when Darcy's not there and Jackson there's something that just goes a little bit off. The big kahuna Tracy, I think, had a fantastic season. Unfortunately, they were a little bit wayward in games, and I think they really couldn't afford it. This is a Fremantle team. I have a lot of high hopes for them because I think they've built really, really well, which is the other scary thing that I think about if Chad Warner were to go back west and he goes to Fremantle, think about a midfield of Brayshaw, Sarong, and Warner all together. That gives you nightmares just thinking about it. So I don't know. I had high expectations for Fremantle halfway through the year. I really thought they were a finals lock. I thought they were a team that could do some damage if they get the right matchup, and they faded. They absolutely faded in the end. So for me, it was a disappointment. The Crows were just as much. I was touting them. I thought they were a top eight side. I thought they had a lot of momentum coming off the year. They had the chip on their shoulder of we should have made finals because of that darn goal judge, yada yada. And it was like they totally forgot going into the start of the season, and they did not play the same footy. I know Rankin got hurt a couple of times, but I don't think that team was bad enough to lose some of the games that they did this year. So I'm 100% with you, Rick, on that. Carlton, for me, I don't know if I would call them disappointing. I just think they were snake bitten, like big time at the worst possible situation for me. That's just me. So we'll jump to it. Next one. Biggest surprise. I'm fascinated what you guys think on this. Biggest surprise for you this year. Rick, we'll start with you.
Hmm, that's a good one. I mean, the logical choice would be to go with Hawthorne, but I gotta admit, I was actually impressed that the doggies made finals. I had kind of written them off. They beat the Giants in round 23. They destroyed North Melbourne the round before that. Yeah, finishing sixth on the ladder, even though they were awful in the game against Hawthorn in the elimination final. I think, again, like the doggies won. Let me see, looking at it right now. Yeah, they won six of their last seven. Their only loss being, ironically, to Adelaide. So I think, they're another side that's just, for as well coached as the Western Bulldogs are, they're just not as consistent as you'd like them to be. Now, heading into 2025, I reckon they're probably in a better position. They're going to be developing more depth. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they have a good draft crop. But yeah, the doggies, at some point, I feel like they need to set their sights higher. I don't think it's not that I think Bevo needs to move on, but when you're getting bounced in elimination finals or qualifying finals too quickly, I mean, the 2016 flag was a long time ago. And the doggies, I think, have been on borrowed time to a degree. They've done a good job of, circling in young talent through the program. I still think Ugle-Hagan is a great player for them. Cody Waitman is very fun to watch. Tim English, Bont, the usual suspects in the midfield. But it's one of those things where, yes, they kind of caught fire at the end and made finals surprisingly, but then they kind of laid an egg. So a bit of a mixed bag there, but I was impressed that they rallied down the stretch and they got into the eight when it mattered. So I'm not really sure what their floor and their ceiling is, though. They really do seem to be perennially stuck in 6th to 13th on the ladder, the dogs. So, and I don't think it's just a reflection of their talent. It's just they need to, be more consistent with getting out. So, but I still think they were surprising in a good way, and they caught fire with that.
All right, Palmy, your thoughts? Biggest surprise.
Um, Melbourne for me. Melbourne, and I say this loosely. The writing was on the wall at the start of the season. They were in the papers for all the bad reasons, but they kind of came out of the blocks pretty well. And sometimes these kind of off-field things with Joe Smith and stuff galvanize a club. They have an unlikely habit, but as soon as the season got to that make a break point, they folded like a hot glove. And every day they're in the paper. You've got Petrarca wants to leave, then he doesn't. Clayton Oliver wants to leave. I look at Melbourne and you could sense there was issues, but I'm surprised Goodwin's still there. Like that's the biggest surprise for me. Goodwin is still there. That club needs to change ASAP, Rocky, and it's only a couple of years ago we were talking about them as the premiers. Do you know what I mean? This is a massive fallout, and where Collingwood still have the stability, still have the name. They've had one bad year. You look at Melbourne, that you wouldn't want to go there at the moment. You wouldn't want to touch it. And Neil Bullen, I think he's a key cog. How hard he works. That looks like an exodus point at the minute, and I fear for Melbourne next year. I think they could be in a world of trouble.
Yeah, especially if for any reason Clayton Oliver does get out of there, it could be quite the horror house that is the Melbourne Demons. I have two, but for two completely different reasons. This is going to be a little bit fun. I have one on the field and one off the field. And this is going to be funny for you two a little bit later. On the field, Richmond Tigers demise. Holy shnikes, I was not expecting them to absolutely lead balloon to the bottom of the table as quickly and as ungracefully as they did. I mean, they face planted this season. I understand they had injuries up the wazoo, but they literally tanked in a way I've never seen before. And I know it wasn't done intentionally. I felt horrible for Uze because literally he was trying to hold this team together with any adhesive he could possibly find, because it just seemed like he would get two players back. He would lose three players that particular week. He would get two back. He would lose another one. He would get one back. He would lose two. It just was an unending cycle of injury and horribly bad footing. I feel bad for the Richmond faithful, and the way the fans have exited is even more incredible. But for me, the surprise, like I said, was the absolute face planting of the Richmond Tigers. And then my off the field one, you're both are going to chuckle at this. Again, how wrong footy media is about Gold Coast's rise to finals contention. Holy crap. Like, I went into this season and I kept saying, I said it in my preseason preview. I said, so many people are tipping Gold Coast to make the finals. And I said, I don't know if you're mad or smoking something, but this Gold Coast team is still built on a house of sand right now. They're not ready there. They're not there yet. Dimma is not a miracle worker. He cannot make a team that are perennial losers and perennial teams that finds ways to lose games they shouldn't and change them overnight. It's not going to happen. And this year we saw it. At home, great. On the road, atrocious. And it's just, I mean, I laughed at so many people. They're like, Gold Coast is going to be my riser. They're going to make finals. And I went, you're going to look really dumb at the end of the year. And I called it. And I don't want, like I said, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but it was just hilarious listening to footy media. They're like, we're disappointed in Gold Coast. I'm not. Why are you disappointed on a team that perennial has not made finals ever in its existence? Why are we giving plaudits? I get it. Dimma is a great coach. Dimma can't make this group automatically just get better. He can't go and it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's going to take some time. And boy, did he show it, especially when he got mad towards the end of the year. Now, he unveiled himself an absolute superstar in Mac Andrew, which I know Melbourne people are cussing up a storm that Mac Andrew got away from them. But where he's at is actually, I think, fantastic for the league. So for me, like I said, the biggest surprise was not really surprised how wrong footy media was about the Gold Coast Suns this year. So I had to throw that in.
I felt like that was more of a fans thing than a media thing. But yeah, you're right. And
Listen to some of the media people, man. Listen to if you go back to the start of the season, listen to how many of the media people had Gold Coast as a team that could make finals. It was
well, yeah,
ridiculous.
but they also had like Adelaide and Collingwood and Melbourne, who we already talked about. So
Yeah, I won't disagree with you, but it was just how many were on the Gold Coast Suns fan
but
just because of Dimma. That Dimma was gonna make that
yeah,
ultimate. So.
they weren't ready for finals. So yeah, that's absolutely true. But I
They'll
think
be
also what you were getting at with Richmond and how I think there needs to be more blame put on the list construction. And you're right, you're absolutely right, Donnie, in terms of like Adam Uze, the proverbial year zero situation because of all the injuries. You have to give him a mulligan, right? But the way the list was constructed, and I've spoken about this in previous episodes, Donnie, with Richmond, their big three, Revolt, Dusty, Cotton, they all should have retired at once. And then Uze, new era, completely new look. That didn't happen. The Jacob Hopper and Tintoreno trades look worse and worse by the day. Shea Bolton wants to go back home to Perth. Richmond is in disarray, and they did not construct the list intelligently because they're in purgatory in terms of like they do have some young talent circulating through the pipeline, but the old guys from the Premiership days are almost all out the door now. There's a few guys like Nan Curvis who stuck around, but they're going to be bottom four for a few years at this rate. As for, your comments, Tommy, about the Ds, I think you were onto something about like the Pies and the Ds being different in terms of like the Premiership hangover. Collingwood had a Premiership hangover. The 2 draws screwed them over, as we mentioned, but they were also losing their mojo in close games. What are they good at under Craig McRae? Collingwood wins close games. They didn't do enough of that this year. No matter how many Daicos heroics they tried to muster, that was their Achilles heel. Versus Melbourne, where, yeah, it's culture issues, it's off-field issues, it's a lot of things. That list was not built to be a dynasty. It was built kind of to be an all-in season 2021. Melbourne wins the flag. Great. What next? And now they pissed off Petrarca with the way they've handled his injuries. Oliver is unhappy. They're really in a bad situation in terms of alienating their star players and just not giving their fans a reason to get excited because the D's played pretty mediocre footy most of the season. And with a list with Maxi gone and Christian Petrarca, Clayton Oliver on it, that's unacceptable. So, and I know it's been well documented. Their forward line is kind of shell its former self, but yeah, the D's have a lot to fix for sure. Add to the sun, add to the eyes.
All right, so that was a lot of fun. We'll go to my favorite one. This is fun because I'd be interested to see what you guys say on this one. Best game of the season. I'm interested on this one. We'll start with Pommy. What's your best game of the year? The one you're going to go back and definitely watch over this offseason?
Probably the Geelong Brisbane game. The prelim final. I think if I'm going to show any of my mates back home a game that will just get you into the game, I think that had everything you want in sport. It was attacking, it was exciting, it could have a winner from both sides deserve to win it. I know Australians always find it funny that you can have a 0-0 draw in the UK and it be an exciting game. That is what I describe a 0-0. 2 teams that are trying to destroy each other, but ultimately it comes down to the finest margin, and that was a fine margin in Brisbane getting up. But I thought that was one of the best games in my 13 years now of living here that I've witnessed. I've really enjoyed watching that game.
Okay. Rick, yours?
Yeah, that would be my choice for the finals. For the home and away season, you'll hate me for this, Donnie, but I remember being shell-shocked at Freo beating Sydney by 1 point when Sydney was 13-1 in round 16. That came out of absolutely nowhere. I still don't know how it happened. That was a crazy finish, and I don't think anyone saw that coming. So that was probably the best home and away season upset or finish. It felt like there were so many So many under a goal finishes this year.
Mhm.
Like it seemed like every time I'm waking up to see the highlights, last 2 minutes, because there were so many tight finishes. Again, I think that's part of what made the season so entertaining, just because the fixture is unpredictable. Any weekend a team can be upset, and sometimes you'll get a mediocre Frio side just shocking Sydney out of nowhere. So that was really crazy to see.
Well, I'm not trying to do this because I'm the host, but I actually have two. And it's only because everybody's going to look at it and go, Coach, you're going to pick a Swans game. So I'm going to pick one Swans game and I'm going to pick one non-Swans game. And for me, I have to pick Mac Andrews game winner for Gold Coast over the Essendon Bombers in round 22 as he the Essendon crowd and pretty much was one of the death nails that put Essendon's season over. Only because I love Mac Andrews' game. I think he's a fantastic player. He's so much fun to watch. He's so athletic. He can go forward. He can go back. He really was a Mr. Utility for Dimma up at the Gold Coast. But this was just an entertaining game. Both teams back and forth. Gold Coast's first win on the road, which was absolutely fantastic for me. It was absolutely great. And then I got to do a Swans game, and I know, and I'm not trying to do this to fire back at Rick for his game for his one earlier, but it has to be that qualifying final against GWS. That was absolutely mental, more just because of everybody talks about New South Wales. I mean, you can't get footy up there. You just can't get the crowd at that game was mental in that last 5 minutes, especially the Heaney goal that goes through. It was an absolute eruption. I have friends that I messaged back and forth that were in the stadium. One said their ears were ringing for 3 minutes at least after the game was over. It was that loud. And then the
I believe
Armati,
it.
the Armati finisher was absolutely mental. It was an incredible game. I'll openly say this, Rick. When Cal Ward bent that snag off the contest, I thought it was over. Legitimately thought that game was over. I thought Cal Ward just put a nail into the Swans' coffin for that game. I thought looks like we're off. We're not on our way on the road to Brisbane. And it was just, I was like, oh man, but what an incredible game. That was so much fun to watch. And the fact that it was two New South Wales teams that kind of made up for a lackluster first round of the finals was absolutely scintillating. Again, I know with Rick that I cheer for GWS when they're not playing Sydney. That was an incredible game. That was tough to watch for me because I do like the Giants. I think the Giants are an incredibly fun team to watch. I know Toby Green irks the crap out of me, but it's like Tommy Papley for most players on other teams. Tommy Papley's a
Yeah.
rat bag. It's just, let's just be honest. You love him on your team, you hate him on another team. So for
And
me,
hey,
that was
that match drew over 43,000. That was
yep,
the final tally.
sold out. Yep,
That
that
was
was
really
absolutely mental. So it was so much fun. Again, it's going to be one I'm definitely going to go back and watch. I probably will only watch the fourth quarter because the first three were probably not so great a watches as a Swans fan. But the final term was absolutely mental. So, gentlemen, that is it. Oh, and actually, I forgot one more. We're gonna have some fun. I want you to take out your crystal balls, gentlemen. I want you to have a bold statement. I want you to put it online right now, a bold statement for next season that you could see happening. Rick, we'll start with you. What's your bold statement for next year?
well. I don't know if it's bold, but why not? We've already discussed it. Nick Dacos will win his first round.
Okay. All right. Palmy?
St Kilda finished top four.
Whoa!
Ooh, I like that. I like
How about
that.
that? Huh.
I have a top four pick myself. Again, I don't think it's bold. I'm kind of with Rick. I don't think it's bold, but I think if they get the guys that they can, I think it's possible, and that's Hawthorne,
Hmm.
our minor premiers next year.
Wow.
I think Hawthorne, if they bring in Barras and they bring in Battle, they've already got a good team next year. I think they can all, I'm not going to say premiers. I'm going to say they'll win the minor premiership for the regular season. I think they could be that good if they keep together that group that they did. Plus they add a couple of nice pieces. I think Hawthorne could be quite the scary team next year for sure. So fellas, that is it. The season is over. I know it's a bittersweet time for me. I love the AFL. It's so much fun. It's always great to find ways to chat with you, Rick, and you, Palmy. It's always so much fun. So it has been an incredible season. Again, Was it a little bit lackluster for me as a Swans fan? Yes, but again, huge congrats to the Brisbane Lions, a well-deserved flag win. But as always, it is so incredible to chat with it. Pommy, again, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. It is incredible chatting with you. For
Here's
those that
fun.
have not had a chance to check you out, could you let us know what's your podcast, Pommy on Oz on YouTube, and kind of what you talk about, just a little bit to let everybody know how to get a hold of what is, I think, incredible content that you put out.
Pommy and Oz on all socials, you'll find me. A big, excellent logo, so you can't miss it. It stands out. But yeah, over on our channel, we're heavy into the analytics, heavily into the draft season. We're trying something different in the off season. We're trying to condense all the news as well. So we take you through that and just try and give you the no nonsense news. We try and look at the facts. And in the off season, make sure you come across me and Lekdog are bringing back Trade Busters, which is like Ghostbusters, but it's where we break down the AFL's ridiculous trade rumors that Cal Toomey makes up and Adam
Uh,
Cooney, but we actually try and look at it objectively and see if there's any reality. So that's always a good fun because we get to bully journalists, and let's be honest, we all enjoy bullying journalists.
especially some of them. And I will say this, we are at that lovely time of the year as we are talking, we are so close to USAFL Nationals. Unfortunately, due to some personal issues, I will not be able to make it down with my Roosters, but I want to, since we're on the podcast and we have one of the LA Dragons finest, Rick, again, I want to wish you best of luck with you and the Dragons this year. I have not had a chance. Where are you guys seated in what division, and how do you think you'll do?
Yeah, so we're playing Div 3. We were hoping to play, we normally play Div 1 or Div 2, so that was a little disappointing. But yeah, we've got North Texas, Calgary, and some other quality sides that we're going up against in Austin next weekend. So we're definitely bringing a competitive side. Hopefully, we all stay injury free throughout the weekend. But yeah, we're always excited to get back to it and go to another nationals. So Austin or bust, and we'll definitely look forward to banking some victories and hopefully getting that D3 flag. So we're very excited at the Dragons.
And it'll be a lot of fun. And for those that want to pay attention to my guys, again, like I said, I will not be there, but I will be barracking for them as much as I can on my couch. They have been drawn into Division 4 and will be joining with Kansas City. I think in a group that they've got a good chance to be successful. It'll be so much fun. If for any reason they will be streamed, I will make sure and put that on the podcast. Same thing with Rick's LA Dragons. If for any reason they are on, I will try to be sure and use it to be able to let you know, for those that are watching this podcast, to watch some USA footy, because it is definitely worth it. There are some really good footy players up here in the States. So that'll do it for another episode of Donnie's Disposals. Keep an eye out. Still a few more podcasts left to do. We're still covering the AFLW. I've got the VFL and Waffle Grand Finals to review as well before we hit the off season. And I've got a really good project that I think I'm going to work on for this off season in my supporter series. So keep an eye on the channel for that. So that'll do it for another episode of Donnie's Disposals. If you like what you're hearing, please like and subscribe, and we'll be back with more footy coverage very, very soon.